Hey, welcome back, everyone. Well, some interesting stuff is going down. We see the tables turning, just being blunt. Actually, the Biden White House, it turns out, was involved with the Trump raid, the raid on Mar-a-Lago. You might remember that that was actually what the suspicion was. The Biden administration initially denied it. Documents started coming out suggesting that Biden removed Trump's executive privilege. That was a big thing. But new documents coming out show that the Biden White House, not even just the Biden administration, was involved with the raid on Mar-a-Lago. And this ties very heavily into the narrative of weaponization of government and raises questions about the attacks on Donald Trump in general, again, being the main political opponent of Joe Biden. It's a very pretty dang significant. There's actually a lot of stuff going on right now where there's new investigations, actually some pretty major findings and rulings that I don't really see being covered, and some really crazy stuff that I see hardly getting covered at all that I want to talk to y'all about today. One of the big ones, which we'll get into, being that the Biden administration, folks, is now being accused. A grand jury in Florida just found this. You heard about the grand jury targeting Trump. How many of you have heard that a grand jury in Florida, and I'll show you the source material, just came out and accused the Biden administration of child trafficking and colluding with the Mexican drug cartels? I'm going to show you this today, folks, and it frankly blows my mind for not seeing this covered in more places. That said, those of you Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, we'll jump over exclusively to Epoch TV after about 25 minutes, so be sure to join us there. Again, I do an hour and a half show, so come join us. Breathe the fresh air of freedom, epochtv.com. And that said, folks, jump into the first story. Let's talk first about Joe Biden and the raid on Mar-a-Lago. Let me show you here Epoch Times. Now it says here, documents obtained by America First Legal Foundation suggest the Biden White House was involved in the FBI raid on former President Donald Trump's home in Florida by way of a special access request, calling into question statements by the Biden administration's officials that the White House did not interfere and did not get involved. This contradicts their official statements, in other words. And, this raises some questions, too, on the post-truth society, where we're told that anybody who says anything that goes against these direct statements from the authorities is somehow spreading misinformation, and they want to have the ability to crush misinformation. Well, what happens when the main spreaders of misinformation, fake news, are the very authorities accusing others of doing it? What happens if you give a habitual liar the powers to control truth? Well, you're going to live in that's what they call a post-truth society. You're going to live in a society blanketed in lies where they can crush any information that actually exposes their lies. The Biden White House was just, frankly, shown to have been lying to people about their involvement on the raid on Mar-a-Lago. And folks like myself who were noting that the Biden White House, based on evidence we were seeing, looked like it was involved, accused of being the dishonest ones, accused of spreading misinformation. Well, repeatedly, I think we see this as a pattern now. Folks like myself, we tend to get shown to be right. That the people accused end up being the ones who tend to get it right, frankly. Let me go deeper into this. It says new NARA, that's National Archives and Records Administration, NARA. New NARA records obtained through America First Legal's investigation into the circumstances surrounding the Mar-a-Lago raid further confirmed, because there was some evidence before, as we discussed, further confirmed that the FBI obtained access to these records through a special access request from the Biden White House. That's not just the Biden administration, but the White House, meaning Biden, frankly, is the chief executive, right? Through the Biden White House on behalf of the Department of Justice, it says the America First Legal Foundation said in a statement, again referring to the National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA. They say the records in question relate to 15 boxes of presidential documents that were transferred to NARA in January of 2022 from Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence and later provided to the FBI for review with the involvement of the White House. It says in the immediate aftermath of the raid, the Biden administration aides were cited in media reports as saying they were, quote, stunned by the development and learned of it from Twitter. Turns out they lied about that. It says days later, White House Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters that the president was not briefed, was not aware of it, no one at the White House was given a heads up about the raid. And Karine Jean-Pierre also lied to the media and lied to the American public when making that statement, as evidence now shows. It says Biden and other White House officials found out about the search of Trump's property through public reports, she insisted. That's also a lie. She said, we learned about this just like the American people did. But AFLF, America First Legal Foundation, said in the letter to NARA, citing to NARA acting archivist Deborah Steidel Wall, that the Biden administration assertion that the White House had no knowledge about the search is, quote, surprising, given the evidence showing that the FBI obtained access to these records through a special access request from the Biden White House on behalf of the Department of Justice. Notably, it says Trump has accused the White House of having prior knowledge of the raid and alleged the DOJ and FBI carried out a politically motivated attack against him. The Epoch Times has reached out to the Department of Justice, NARA, and the White House for comment. We did not receive a reply as of publication. However, the White House press secretary, Pierre Jean-Pierre, who is shown to have been lying repeatedly at this point, earlier addressed the matter of reports that the White House was involved in the process of giving the FBI access to records, and she said, quote, it shows the DOJ made a request for access to an older set of documents independently, and the White House affirmed it, which is standard. She told a press briefing on August 29th of 2022, nothing unusual here. What also should be noted is that Joe Biden signed off to remove Trump's executive privilege that allowed the raid to take place in the first place, which was one of the other major factors that came out with that whole raid. And so let's make that clear. The Biden White House, Biden, signed off on removing Trump's executive privilege and then signed off to allow for the DOJ, Department of Justice through the FBI, to raid Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, and then they lied to the public, denying these two things happened, even though documents exist showing it happened. That's where we are now. Now, the important part with this is that, frankly, one of the big narratives in America right now is the weaponization of government. The idea the Biden administration, the accusation at least, has weaponized the Department of Justice and its arms through the FBI and other organizations to attack political enemies. And then on one side, they're letting people off the hook. They're not charging people. They're letting rioters and criminals and sexual predators go free if they're Democrat or if they serve the interests of the Democratic Party. On the other side, they're going after people for everything. They're elevating misdemeanors to felonies. They're going after crimes that are past the statute of limitations. They're overturning even, for example, the Biden administration is even going after individuals who are previously pardoned for their crimes by Donald Trump, and they're bringing out charges again, which you would normally call double jeopardy. You can't legally do that. And they're throwing legal precedent to the wind. They're throwing the legal basis for these types of investigations and charges into the wind, and it looks like they're doing it for political purposes. At least that's the accusation, and frankly, they're getting called out pretty heavily for it right now, and I would argue there's still enough legal integrity in America to hold them accountable for it, as I will be showing you today, folks. Before we go further into this, we do have a sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. When I look at the numbers on gold, you want to see how it's doing. It says, as we've been talking about, inflation is going to continue and likely get worse. Even Fed Chair Powell is warning us to brace ourselves. Well, there's one way to hedge against inflation. American Hartford Gold makes it simple and easy to diversify your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one short phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A-plus rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver and a free safe on qualifying orders. So don't wait, call them now. That's 877-260-2764. Again, 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. Again, that's 877-260-2764, or text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. Meanwhile, folks, a probe has been launched over the Biden administration's approval of the booster shots. Now, this goes both ways, let's be honest with ourselves. Donald Trump initially had Operation Warp Speed and pushed through the authorization of the vaccines, or the shots, whatever you want to call them. People have noted, justifiably, that if you oppose the vaccines, if you oppose the boosters, Trump did it too. Let's just be honest with ourselves, right? Let's not pull the old Biden admin Lady Justice and lift the blindfold and say, well, it's okay if these guys do it, but not okay if these guys do it. The Trump administration pushed that through. You could argue the difference with Trump was that he wasn't pushing for vaccine mandates, and he was also pushing for other treatments like hydroxychloroquine and other things that have been shown now to be effective with COVID-19. So there is some nuance to it, of course. But let me show you this. It says exclusive here, Daily Caller. Representative Massey, Judiciary Committee, launched probe into reports the Biden administration pressured the FDA over COVID booster approval. And why is this significant? Because it's tit for tat. They're accusing Donald Trump of doing the same thing. The Biden administration and a lot of the leftist media, they're accusing Trump of having pressured the FDA, again through Operation Warp Speed, which fast-tracked the approval process of the COVID-19 shots or vaccines, in order to get them approved and pushed through. And what Daily Caller is doing here is they're saying, well, Biden did it too. Or at the very least, these officials are looking into whether Biden did it too, specifically with the boosters. It says here, Republican Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey sent letters Monday to senior Food and Drug Administration, FDA, vaccine officials, letting them know the House Judiciary Committee, will be investigating allegations the Biden administration interfered with the FDA's authorization and licensure of the COVID-19 vaccines. The Daily Caller first obtained the letters to Dr. Maureen Gruber and Dr. Philipp Krause, both of whom resigned following President Joe Biden's announcement in August 2021, calling for adults to receive a COVID-19 booster shot, which Massey says put pressure on the FDA health officials to quickly authorize the vaccinations. What's the significance of this? The significance of it, again, is they're trying to throw Trump under the bus with this. They're accusing Trump of having pressured the FDA into doing this. And this is just, as far as I'm concerned, politics and also kind of legal protection somewhat. I would say in terms of partisan politics. What it appears the Republicans are doing is, as the Biden administration tries to go after Trump for pressuring the FDA to approve the COVID-19 shots or vaccines, they're showing that Joe Biden did the same thing. And so if Biden chooses to go after Trump because of that pressure through Operation Warp Speed, they can say, well, you did it too. Keep in mind the same thing took place after the raid on Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. They were accusing Trump of taking classified documents. I should note, as I've shown you previously, Trump twice declassified those documents, once in a tweet, which is legally shaky. Technically, the president has very broad declassification powers, and through a single statement could do that as long as there's a witness present. Whether that could be done through Twitter is debatable, but of course that's one of the things Trump is using, saying I declassify the documents. The second time Trump declassified them was before he left office, but I believe either just before or right after January 6th. And I believe it was actually right before. Regardless, he did go through the proper process that time, meaning that Trump's holding of those documents would be him holding declassified documents, not classified documents, even though they would still contain classified markings, which is the legal limbo the Justice Department is pulling to try to say these things were illegally taken. If you have a document that was classified, and you verbally or in writing declare it has been declassified, the writing on the document does not change. Meaning, even though the document has been legally declassified, it will still contain classified markings. And if you read the technicalities of the legal accusations against Trump, the language they use is documents with classified markings, meaning they could be declassified documents, but they still have the markings. In other words, it's a very legally deceptive way of doing it, in my opinion. But remember that after that happened, it turned out Joe Biden, even when he was not president, when he was still a senator, was taking classified documents to his private home, ironically, which is listed as the residence of Hunter Biden, his crack addict, sex addict son, and also storing them in his garage. And Biden tried arguing, well, aside from the point that he did not have executive privilege at that time, he would have been a senator, and it raises questions of how he even got those documents because of the very secure way in which senators and Congress members would be able to view classified documents. He really can't remove them from there. It raises some serious questions over how he got them, not to mention the fact while Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago, you could argue, is pretty secure. Joe Biden's garage, I don't know about that, at least when he was senator. Now it's probably a lot more secure, of course. But Joe Biden said, well, it's right by my Ferrari. And he said that there was a lock on the garage door. And based on that, he's saying they were secure documents. So take it for what you will. Point being, though, we keep seeing that what they accuse Trump of, a lot of them have done. Even with the Stormy Daniels thing, we're seeing, of course, as I showed you previously, Congress has a slush fund to pay people off when they make sexual harassment allegations. They have a taxpayer-funded slush fund. The Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, the Democratic Party, both had to pay a fine to the authorities over financing the fake news Steele dossier, which falsely accused Trump of colluding with Russia to rig the elections, which they then used notably to try to remove a sitting president from office, knowingly spreading false information and using false allegations to do so. That's massive. And all they had to do was pay a fine. What Trump did is of similar nature to that, but he didn't try to launch a coup against the United States using, his payments to Stormy Daniels. That's the big difference here, right? Let's go further into it, though, folks. There's a Democrat governor who, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, actually shut down churches. And a lot of people were questioning, well, can they do this legally? Remember, I think it was the Atlantic came out with a story saying we need to have an amnesty. We need to forgive and forget all these officials who violated people's basic constitutional protected rights, who eliminated free speech, who shut down churches but kept open strip joints and marijuana dispensaries so you can get high and look at strippers, but you can't worship God because that's a threat to your health. Because again, there's a virus spreading, and while you have to lock yourself in your home, and you can't go out or you're going to kill your grandma by getting them sick, you are able to go and hold mass protests and riots on the street because racial equality and equity is more important. You remember all the officials that did this? That's in California. That's in New York. That was all over the country. Well, they want to say, hey, forgive and forget. We just didn't know. Although, at Obama's birthday party, sure, we were partying without our masks on, except for the servants, because, while officials cannot spread COVID-19, their servants can. And you need to make sure the servants cannot infect the higher class because it's very risky to their health if servants can breathe on them. You might remember that as well. Well, those people are saying, hey, we didn't know any better. Let's all just put it behind us and let's forgive and forget. We need amnesty for us. The officials who were saying, we hope you there were some crazy tweets there. People were wishing very bad things on other people. A lot of people lashed out against those articles and said, no, we're not going to forgive and forget. We need to hold people accountable, because if we don't, you'll probably try to do it to us again. And we need to make sure you never do this to us again. You can't just violate the Constitution. You can't just throw our rights to the wind and have, ironically, contradictory public policies where you're letting some people do it and not others. You can't do that. And one of the ways you ensure they don't do it is you hold them legally accountable. You go after them. You sue them. And that's now happened, at least in in a few areas now, but I'll show you one case in particular, a recent one. Keep in mind there's been a few cases like this that have actually won. Daily Caller says, Democratic governor who shut down churches during COVID ordered to pay over $270,000 in attorney's fees. It says a federal appeals court ruled Monday that 3 individuals who sued the Kentucky governor for the right to assemble for worship during COVID-19 must be paid over $270,000 in attorney fees. It says Randall Daniel, Theodore Roberts, and Sally O'Boyle sued in August of 2020 after they received notices logging their attendance at Maryville Baptist Church's East Service and informing them they must quarantine or, quote, face further enforcement measures. The group alleged Democratic Governor Andrew Beshear's ban on religious gatherings and interstate travel violated their constitutional rights, which the Sixth Circuit has now affirmed in May of 2020, according to court documents. And on Monday, it says the Sixth Circuit upheld a court ruling awarding the congregants $272,142.50 in attorney's fees, rejecting the governor's challenges. And they said, quote, this is the judge, I believe. This is Roberts, right? I know a lot of people who are outraged that the taxpayer is on the hook for Andy's constitutional violation. I share this outrage, but this outrage must be aimed at Beshear, the governor. If the people of Kentucky want to quit being taxed to pay for these court judgments, Kentucky must elect a governor who will actually follow the Constitution. That's what they're saying. They're using this for election purposes. But regardless of the point, even though this appears to be a small thing, like they're just paying for the attorney fees, it has a deeper symbolic meaning and a deeper precedent, which is the officials who violated the constitutional rights of their constituents, the officials who did this, are being shown you can't do that. You cannot legally do that to people. And even though the case itself did not result in like technically huge payouts, this isn't like millions or billions of dollars you have to pay them, or let alone even pay the people. They're just paying, again, the lawyers. In terms of what it represents, this is significant because, again, it demonstrates you can't do that to people. You can't do that to Americans in particular. We have rights protected by the Constitution, and you can't just toss that out whenever you feel like it. The Founding Fathers didn't sit around, writing the Constitution. They're like, well, if things get kind of weird, none of this is relevant anymore. So let's just make a note in the Constitution. If the governor decides that people shouldn't have any of these rights, none of the rights we're listing here apply anymore. Like, they didn't do that. You can't just toss it out like that. You can't toss it out in general. And so, again, it's positive from that standpoint. Let me show you more, folks. Lots going on. Of course, we'll get into Joe Biden and child trafficking in a minute. Well, Joe Biden's administration and child trafficking, which they've been accused of now by a grand jury in Florida. But first, another story. A House panel is going to examine Bragg's policies. Now, one issue you've been having with Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in New York, who's targeting former President Donald Trump, is that, well, they're saying this looks like it's politicized persecution. Not prosecution, persecution. Meaning the federal government is targeting a political enemy, someone on the opposite side of the spectrum, who they're going after not because he broke the law, but because they don't want him, basically challenging their power. Well, guess what? We still live in a republic. We still are able to elect the officials who represent us. And frankly, the election system is based on people challenging people's hold on power. That's the nature of an election. That's the nature of a society wherein people elect their officials. You're supposed to have people who campaign, and during their campaign, they criticize what the person in power is doing that they are going to do differently. That's the nature of politics. And unfortunately, there are people now who believe that politics shouldn't be able to be criticized. Well, how are you going to hold elections if you can't criticize policy? How are you going to hold elections if you can't hold people accountable like this? Well, the accusation against Alvin Bragg is that his indictment against Trump, or the Stormy Daniels case, where he's elevated misdemeanor charges to felonies while not stating the crime Trump violated to justify that very extreme action in doing so, ironically in the case that was already expired because it was past the statute of limitations, and then took that one charge and then multiplied it 34 times in order to charge the former president of the United States tossing out his executive privilege, and the leading candidate of the Republican Party and the leading opponent to the standing president, doing all of that on extremely shaky legal terms to the degree, as I mentioned, watch my previous episodes this week on it, to the extent that even New York Times, CNN, and Washington Post are noting that it's frankly kind of ridiculous. Well, that it's ridiculous. It's probably not going to hold up. Maybe Trump will be found guilty in New York only because in New York you can't get a fair trial if you're on the wrong side of politics, and that's the accusation. And that's actually what the House Judiciary Committee is going to be looking into now. They're going to be looking specifically into Alvin Bragg. And some of the accusations against them, some you could argue justifiably, are that, well, state law and federal law are different. The federal government should not be intervening in state courts. Well, it's debatable because Alvin Bragg has elevated a misdemeanor to a felony, a federal crime, and somehow still wants to keep this in it still wants to keep this in New York when through other, not just being a felony crime, which you can charge felonies in any state, but still wants to keep it in this court despite the fact it should actually be moved to a different court, given some of the technicalities of the case. But regardless, they're saying, well, how dare the federal government criticize the state government? How dare they try to intervene? There's some grounds to that. Let's be honest, right? There's some grounds to that. The federal government should not be getting involved technically in the rights of states. I mean, within certain boundaries, right? But at the same time, too, if they're going after, well, the former president and the leading candidate for one of the two main political parties in the country and the main contender against the president in the upcoming elections, well, you better investigate them. Otherwise, you can have any rogue DA in the country basically, annihilate America's election system. Alvin Bragg has put himself in that position. But the House Judiciary is taking another route with this. They're not specifically, well, they are in other ways, looking into Alvin Bragg going after Trump, but they're also looking into Alvin Bragg's track record. Namely the fact that while he has elevated a misdemeanor charge to a felony to go after Trump, he has a track record of lowering felonies to misdemeanors to let criminals off the hook. And this has flooded New York City with murderers, with rapists, with other criminals who very often, based on statistics, go on to, commit the same crimes or worse crimes, including murder, including rape, and including very terrible crimes that have been reported. And yeah, they can say, well, crime is down in New York. Well, yeah, if you legalize crime, if you take felony crimes and you degrade them to misdemeanors, you could argue there are fewer felonies because, hey, you threw out the felonies. It's like, is it a crime if you legalize crime? That's some 4D chess right there. I mean, I don't know what to tell these guys. But this is what Alvin Bragg has been doing. And, of course, now you have the government looking into it, the federal government. Let me show you. New York Post. House panel to examine victims of Bragg's policies, the people who've been victimized through people who've, reoffended after being let off by Bragg. As the GOP Republican Party casts doubts on NYC prosecutor Bragg, who took on Trump. It says the House Judiciary Committee will hear from victims of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's policies during a hearing in New York next week, escalating a confrontation with the progressive prosecutor over his unprecedented criminal case against former President Donald Trump, the Post has learned. It says the field hearing will be held at 9 a.m. Monday, April 17th at the Jacob Javits Federal Building just blocks from Bragg's Lower Manhattan office, and the courthouse where Trump, 76, was arraigned on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records last week. Well, one misdemeanor past statute of limitations elevated to a felony, then multiplied 34 times. It's a more accurate way of putting it. It says a source told the Post that the hearing will examine New York's rampant crime and victims of Alvin Bragg. Big deal. I'm not saying that being funny. That's actually a pretty dang big deal. It says Republicans have slammed Bragg as being soft on conventional crime while embracing a novel legal theory pushed by George Soros to bring the first ever criminal case against an ex-president. Pushed by George Soros that, again, has a soft on crime policy. It's unclear if committee chairman Jim Jordan of the House Judiciary Committee will invite Bragg, but a source told the Post the move has not been ruled out. The source said that victims of Bragg's failure to prosecute are expected to be witnesses, though they were not immediately able to share their expected witness list. That's important because if it's found that Bragg is in dereliction of duty, then he can be removed from office. And notably, remember that even a lot of the other Soros-appointed DAs and the Soros system that's pushing this weak on crime program through the country, ironically causing violence like, frankly, we've never seen before. Well, maybe not since the 90s. That this is on his head, that blood is on George Soros' hands, and the blood is on the hands of people like Alvin Bragg. Now, if he is found to be in dereliction of duty, he can get removed from office. They can remove him, and you have processes already underway in other parts of the country, including in actually very blue states and in very Democrat areas, where the woke DAs, through George Soros, the George Soros cartel, I think we should just call it, where the George Soros cartel has basically enabled criminals and has harmed significantly innocent people. Even in very far left areas, you're finding these people are too extreme, and they're removing them from office. If that happens to Alvin Bragg, well, that's the case against Trump. Someone else is going to be appointed to it probably, but it would be pretty significant if that did happen. And they're looking into it in other ways as well. All right, folks, that said, let's jump over to Epoch TV, and then we'll talk about Biden administration accused by a grand jury in Florida of child trafficking and of collusion with the Mexican drug cartels. And I'm not exaggerating this in any way. I will show you the source materials. This is real 100%. I'll show you the source. And I'll show you the actual accusations, the findings on it. It's pretty dang significant. Before we jump over to Epoch TV, let me show you a quick trailer, and then I'll see you there. Hi there, Josh Philipp here. Our values are being assaulted every day by the lies that mainstream media perpetuate, and it's put our country on the edge of a knife, with no one knowing whether or not we'll make it. If you love our country and the freedoms we celebrate, I'll give you the number one thing you can do to ensure this country stays this way. Now, you probably feel that's impossible. Maybe you think the situation is too far gone. I felt the same way until I joined the Epoch Times, started this show, and saw the power that truth can bring our growing audience. That's why I wanted to tell you there is something you can do. You can ensure the truth gets out there from my show. And by supporting me, you're supporting the Epoch Times, and you're supporting independent journalism that is bar none this country's best hope in surviving the onslaught against our values and freedoms. Shockingly, most people don't even realize that almost every mainstream media company belongs to one of 6 huge corporations, all with their own agendas and demanding shareholders. Some even think it's a good thing. Folks, how can we ensure the reporting is free of bias? We can't. This is why my show and the Epoch Times is so critical. We're completely independent. Our only interest is in traditional journalism and reporting truthfully. The Epoch Times is the antidote. It's time to replace these prevalent narratives with the truth and get back to the basics.
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All you have to do is subscribe to Epoch TV, and you'll get so much more in return. With your subscription, you get access to hundreds of exclusive videos, over 30 channels, live shows, events, and even hard-hitting documentaries and films that are changing the game. Just click on the link in the description of the show, and you're on your way. Thanks so much for watching me and for your support, and remember, the only way to truly protect our freedoms is to stay informed.
All right, folks, that's it. Let's jump over to Epoch TV. I see some of you asking about the two-tier justice system. When will it ever change?